You're watching Behind the Headlines. I'm Pacchia. We're roughly 2 weeks away from the 3-year anniversary of the Dodd-Frank Act getting signed into federal law by President Barack Obama. But despite the law's advancing age, there are still many parts of the enormous bill that have yet to come online. Joining me now to take stock of where we are and where we're going with respect to this financial regulatory reform law, we have Congressman Alan Grayson in our nation's capital. Welcome, sir. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So law firm Davis Polk put out a really interesting study that says regulators have missed over 70% of the rulemaking deadlines set out in Dodd-Frank. That means there's a whole slew of finalized rules that were supposed to go towards preventing another financial meltdown, but instead they are currently stuck in some kind of legislative purgatory. Does this persistent lag on the rulemaking front mean that Dodd-Frank is something of a failure?
No, Dodd-Frank is not a failure because, in case you haven't noticed, we haven't had another crash. The purpose of Dodd-Frank, above all, was to give stability to the financial system, and that's been accomplished so far, and thank God for that. I like to see these rules go on a much quicker pace. It disturbs me to see any deadlines missed. I think that's bad. There are a couple of explanations for it, but none of them are good explanations. The fact is that deadlines should be met. But in terms of the success of the bill overall, I think you'd have to rate it a success because we're still here.
Right. A lot of the delay has been attributed to the difficulty of coordinating amongst the various regulatory agencies, especially the SEC and the CFTC. Did the government miss a golden opportunity back in the heat of the financial crisis to consolidate and simplify the financial regulatory scheme when they passed this bill?
Yes, the government did miss that opportunity, and I think that people involved here in the Capitol recognize that that's unfortunate. There are deep historical roots to these divisions, but they need to be overcome. There is no reason why we have to have such a balkanized regulatory system, and in effect, what it does put us at greater risk for a financial meltdown because everybody can point the finger at somebody else if that does occur.
Right. Congressman, I want to drill down here. Are you suggesting that we should merge the SEC and CFTC?
I think we should do more than that. I think that all these functions should be consolidated with regard to whatever kind of financial oversight is being performed. I think it should be done in a unified fashion.
So you're basically proposing one agency for one job, it sounds like.
Yes, and that job's a very important one. Our system, the system of prices, the system of capitalism, the system of supply and demand, that system has been prone to crises going back to the 1700s. It's a recognized phenomenon. It's been ameliorated somewhat by the fact that we now use paper money as our money supply, but the fact is that there's instability that's built into the system. There are booms and there are busts, and the responsibility for ameliorating that problem should be centralized. The government needs to manage the economy in a satisfactory manner, not only with regard to avoiding busts, but also with regard to aggregate demand and other important functions. The fact that you separate those functions and put them in different agencies doesn't do anybody any good.
There also appears to be a lot of political momentum behind the idea of deregulating the derivatives markets. I'm referring to a piece of legislation that passed in the House and is moving along towards the Senate. Sometimes it's known as the London Whale Loophole Act. Whether or not this bill passes into law, derivatives regulation was supposed to be one of the more important parts of the Dodd-Frank overhaul. If that gets watered down, what does that mean for the entire financial regulatory reform effort?
Well, it's not going to happen. That bill is going nowhere. There is no momentum behind it. It's simply a sop by the Republicans who run the House of Representatives. It's a genuflection toward their corporate masters on Wall Street. That's what it amounts to. And that bill has no chance of passing the Senate. I'm sure the president would veto it if it did come to his desk. It's a bad idea. When you're in a time when there are single entities, single corporations that have as much as $1 trillion in derivative liability, that's a trillion with a T, $1,000 billion. We don't need less regulation. We need more regulation to make sure that the whole system does not come crashing down.
Right. Yeah, whether or not that bill passes, we're still seeing a sense of polarization out there on the very idea of financial regulatory reform in general. That necessarily creates a fair amount of uncertainty. And if one thing is certain, uncertainty is very bad for everyone involved, especially Wall Street. Do the negative aspects of this uncertainty at a certain point begin to outweigh what's been gained by the legislation in Dodd-Frank?
No. Listen, there is a great deal of financial illiteracy among public policymakers. I tend to think that there's more on the other side than there is on our side. I don't know how any rational person can conclude that we should deregulate Wall Street after the experience that we had just 5 years ago. That seems to me to be a very strange thing to do. If you take the historical context, the case is even stronger that we need regulations. Basically, Gresham's law rules. When you don't have regulations, bad money drives out good money, and you end up with a system that becomes more and more and more unstable. The basic point of the legislation was to try to figure out ways to prevent the system from crashing, and the fact that there are stray bills introduced by an illegitimate Republican majority that is kept here by gerrymandering and dirty money does not change the fact that we need regulations simply as a matter of rational management of our own economy.
Yeah, let's take the politics and set them aside for a moment. What's the Alan Grayson prescription for the way forward? What should this industry look like in 5 years, supposing you were made king?
Well, first of all, we need to have rational margin requirements. We need to have margin requirements that everybody understands, that are adhered to, and we also need internal processes that are checked from the outside to make sure that there are not undue risks being taken. I'll give you an example of what I regard as an undue risk. Entities on Wall Street right now are doing things like running uranium mines, completely unrelated to any sort of financial business. I wrote a letter to the chairman of the Federal Reserve recently pointing this out and suggesting that that is creating a new layer of risk in the system to have financial entities running non-financial businesses. In general, what we need is the same kind of good regulation and good government that people have understood how to accomplish now for something like 100 years. We just have to do it and make sure that entities that are motivated strictly and only by profit don't undermine our efforts for the sake of profit that's short-term and puts all of us at risk. We can't have them socialize the losses while they privatize the gains.
Congressman, before I let you go, Twitter is abuzz with speculation that Larry Summers will be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. What would you make of such an appointment should it come to pass?
With all due respect to Summers, I think that would be a very poor choice. If you look at what happened to the Harvard endowment while he was in charge, it was very ugly. And I think that in some respects he has impeded the recovery. This is one of the weakest recoveries that America's seen after any recession for a long, long time. Part of that is his opposition to greater stimulus when the country really needed it in 2009 and 2010. I don't think he's shown any ability to run either the Harvard endowment or the U.S. economy in a constructive fashion. I wish it were otherwise. I wish him well personally, but I have to think about what's good for America, not what's good for Larry Summers.
All right, Congressman Alan Grayson, thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you, too.
If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates, of course, on Twitter. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.